Naima Kersey thought she knew the man she married. Jaxon Kersey, a decorated police officer, was praised by the community and loved by his peers. But when Naima walked into her daughter Liora's room one rainy night, she uncovered a horrifying secret that shattered everything. A secret so vile, it forced her to pull the trigger and end it all. What drove a quiet mother to commit a deadly act? And what chilling truths had been hiding behind the badge for years? This is the story of a perfect family destroyed by the evil lurking within. Naima Kersey lived in the quiet suburb of Ridge Hollow, a neighborhood known more for dog walkers and garden parties than anything that would make the evening news. Her home sat at the end of a tidy cul-de-sac, where mailboxes were freshly painted and wind chimes hung from nearly every porch. To the outside world, she had everything: an accomplished husband, a well-mannered daughter, and a peaceful life. But behind the drawn curtains and manicured lawn, something was beginning to fracture. Her husband, Jaxon Kersey, was a highly respected police officer. He was often praised for his courage, discipline, and leadership within the department. Officers looked up to him, and parents in the neighborhood nodded with pride whenever he drove past in his patrol car. Jaxon was the kind of man people trusted automatically. He gave firm handshakes, remembered names, and always showed up on time. He had been with the Ridge Hollow Police Department for over 15 years, earning accolades and the unwavering support of his peers. Naima met Jaxon during her first year working as a medical transcriptionist. They married quickly, and soon after, Liora was born. Naima quit her office job and took freelance assignments so she could stay home with their daughter. From the beginning, Jaxon had very clear rules about parenting. He insisted on structure, obedience, and routine. At first, Naima agreed, but over time, his rules became more rigid. Liora wasn't allowed to visit friends after school. She couldn't have a phone until she turned 13. And even when she used her mother's, it was under strict surveillance. Naima initially believed he was being protective. The world was full of dangers, and as a police officer, Jaxon had seen things she hadn't. But as Liora grew older, his behavior shifted from protective to possessive. He became irritated when Naima spent too much one-on-one time with their daughter. He demanded to know every detail of Liora's day, from what she ate at lunch to what she said in class. If she didn't answer fast enough, his mood soared instantly. The tension in the house thickened with each passing month. The signs started small. Liora grew more reserved. She no longer sang around the house like she used to. She spent more time alone in her room with the door closed. When Naima would knock and enter, Liora often looked startled, as if she were bracing herself. Sometimes, Naima spotted faint bruises, nothing obvious, just slight discolorations on her arms or ankles. When she asked, Liora mumbled explanations that didn't quite make sense, tripped on the stairs, ran into a desk, gym class accident. Naima's concern deepened, but Jaxon always had an answer. He claimed she was overthinking, letting her anxiety get the best of her. He accused her of being emotional, even paranoid. And because he wore a badge, Naima questioned herself more than she should have. Who was she to doubt a man who'd risked his life for others? Still, the feeling never left her. A mother's intuition doesn't fade, even when reason tries to bury it. Then one day, while vacuuming under the couch, Naima found something that sent chills down her spine. A crumpled drawing. It was done in Liora's handwriting. The picture was of a small girl inside what looked like a cage with a tall, dark figure standing outside. In the corner, the girl had written a single word, stuck. That night, Naima couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with worst-case scenarios she didn't dare say aloud. She reached out to her best friend, Marla Rhine, a woman she'd known since college. Marla had always disliked Jaxon, calling him controlling and fake. When Naima told her about the drawing, Marla's voice dropped. She urged Naima to keep a record of everything, to start writing down what she saw, what she heard, and anything that felt off. So Naima did. She bought a notebook and kept it hidden inside a hollowed-out cookbook. Every night, when Jaxon fell asleep, she wrote. The times he left for patrol, the way Liora's mood shifted, the moments that didn't sit right. And the more she wrote, the more the illusion of her perfect home shattered. But Naima still didn't know how far the truth had gone. Not yet. Not until the night everything collapsed. And the secrets her husband kept could no longer be ignored. It was a rainy Friday evening in late April when Naima Kersey's life took an irreversible turn. The forecast had called for thunderstorms, but nothing prepared her for the chaos that was about to strike inside her own home. The day had started uneventfully. Routine errands, a short freelance assignment she typed up before noon, and a quick call with Marla about upcoming school events. Naima was in better spirits than usual. She had a rare moment of lightness. Planning to surprise Liora with a movie night since Jaxon had claimed he would be working late on patrol. She picked up Liora's favorite takeout and rented a film they had talked about weeks ago. As the sky darkened and the rain began to pour, Naima pulled into the driveway feeling something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Maybe tonight would bring some joy. Maybe she could talk to Liora and break through the walls her daughter had built. Maybe things could slowly start to heal. The house was quiet when she entered. She expected to find Liora in her room or on the couch. But something didn't sit right. A faint sound floated down the stairs, barely audible over the tapping rain. It was rhythmic, almost like movement, or shifting weight on the floor above. Naima paused at the base of the staircase. Her grip tightened around the food bags in her hands. She set them down gently and started to climb. As she ascended, each step felt heavier. The air grew denser. When she reached the landing, she heard a creak from Liora's bedroom. The door was cracked open slightly, just enough to reveal a thin stream of light. Naima moved closer, her pulse racing. She didn't understand what she was walking into, but some primal instinct warned her that something was deeply wrong. She pushed the door open wider, and in that moment her world fell apart. Inside, under the warm glow of a bedside lamp, stood Jaxon, shirtless, hovering over Liora. The child sat motionless on the bed, her eyes wide, her face pale. Her small hands were trembling. Jaxon turned, his expression twisted with panic, guilt, and something darker Naima couldn't process. For a brief second, time froze. Naima's body went cold. Her breath vanished. Everything around her dissolved into a blur except for the horrific scene in front of her. She turned and ran, not out of the house, but straight into their bedroom. She knew exactly where he kept his gun. It was locked in a drawer beside the bed. She had watched him open it 100 times. Her fingers, shaking uncontrollably, managed to twist the key and lift the latch. She returned to Liora's room with the weapon in her hand, her heart hammering in her chest. The fear, the doubt, the years of pretending, it all vanished. In its place was a fury so powerful it swallowed her whole. 3 shots rang out. The first struck Jaxon in the chest, sending him reeling backward. The second caught him as he tried to crawl. The third silenced him for good. His body collapsed onto the floor in a grotesque sprawl, blood seeping into the fibers of the carpet. Naima stood there, still holding the gun, breathing in ragged gasps. The only sound was the distant rumble of thunder outside and the slow, shallow breathing of her daughter. Then the room began to spin. The weight of what she had just done sank in like a boulder. She dropped the weapon and collapsed to the ground. Her vision blurred. The storm outside seemed to roar louder. Then everything went black. When Naima awoke, it was to the cold touch of metal handcuffs and the flash of red and blue lights outside the window. Police officers moved through the house methodically, checking every room. Liora was carried out by paramedics, wrapped in a blanket, her face blank and unreadable. Detective Marvin Arlo arrived minutes later, briefed hastily by officers who couldn't hide their horror. They all knew Jaxon. They all thought they knew the kind of man he was. Naima was lifted to her feet, barely able to speak. The question started before she even left the house, but she had no answers. Her eyes stayed fixed on the blood-stained hallway where her husband's body still lay. Whatever illusion had remained of her life was gone. Everything she once believed in had ended in 3 deafening shots. And the truth was only beginning to come to light. The early morning hours after the shooting were soaked in confusion and disbelief. Ridge Hollow's quiet was shattered. By sunrise, news vans began circling the Kersey home like vultures. Neighbors watched from windows and porches as crime scene tape wrapped around the yard. The headline started simple: "Local officer shot in family home." But the story deepened quickly as details began leaking. Everyone knew Jaxon Kersey, the officer with the clean record, the community hero. But no one had known what he was behind closed doors. Naima was held in a cold, dimly lit room at the local precinct. She barely responded during intake. Her blood-streaked clothes were bagged as evidence. An officer asked routine questions, but her mind was blank, except for the frozen image of her daughter's face. At the hospital, Liora underwent physical and psychological evaluations. Detectives waited hours for clearance to speak with her. But when they finally did, what she said would change the course of the case. Detective Marvin Arlo was tasked with leading the investigation. He had worked alongside Jaxon for nearly a decade. The two had shared cases, coffee, and conversations about fatherhood. He remembered when Liora was born. Jaxon had passed out cigars at the station. Marvin had always admired him. But as the pieces started falling into place, a different version of Jaxon began to emerge. And it was uglier than anything he'd ever seen on the job. The initial medical reports revealed signs of trauma on Liora, both recent and old marks, scars, inconsistencies that couldn't be explained away. When the forensic exam confirmed sexual abuse, the case shifted from a domestic shooting to something far more sinister. Marvin's stomach twisted as he read the findings. This wasn't just a crime scene. It was the collapse of everything he thought he understood about justice, trust, and the people he worked beside. Officers searched the Kersey home thoroughly. Behind a row of books on a bedroom shelf, they discovered Naima's hidden notebook, the one Marla had told her to keep. Every page was filled with dates, small observations, and troubling patterns. Entries detailed Jaxon's controlling behavior, Liora's declining mood, and her physical changes. Some pages had tears where Naima had pressed the pen too hard. Others included sketches of things Liora had drawn: cages, faceless figures, storm clouds. It was a disturbing collection of ignored warnings. Marvin read the notebook cover to cover. Each page peeled back the layers of a family suffocating under silence. He couldn't ignore it. The woman they had arrested for homicide might not be a criminal at all, but someone who had been cornered with no way out. At Liora's school, her teacher Camille Dort came forward with her own suspicions. She shared how Liora's demeanor had changed in recent months. Once a curious, active student, Liora had become reclusive and anxious. She rarely made eye contact. She flinched when someone stood too close. And there was one day, just 2 weeks prior, when Liora stayed behind after class and cried when Camille tried to call her father. The deeper Marvin dug, the more cracks appeared in Jaxon's public image. A decade-old internal complaint resurfaced, one involving a teenage girl pulled over during a night patrol. The report had been quietly buried. Marvin couldn't find who signed off on it. Another officer came forward anonymously and mentioned Jaxon's temper. How he once threw a suspect against a wall during an arrest, only for it to be covered up. Still, many in the department struggled to believe it. Jaxon had been their friend, their mentor. But the truth didn't care about reputations. It was raw, and it was devastating. Marvin arranged for Naima to undergo a psychological evaluation, hoping it might reveal more about her mental state. The psychiatrist noted signs of severe trauma, prolonged emotional suppression, and what appeared to be years of silent suffering. Naima refused to speak about the shooting directly. Her only question, asked softly and with tears brimming, was about Liora's safety. She didn't ask about bail or charges or what would happen to her. Just about her daughter. That alone told Marvin more than any confession ever could. And so, with a body in the morgue, a shattered child in a hospital bed, and a mother in chains, Marvin knew the case had shifted into something the town of Ridge Hollow had never faced before. A decorated officer wasn't just dead, he was exposed. And the woman who pulled the trigger might have done what no one else had the courage to do. The town of Ridge Hollow reeled as the truth trickled out, spreading like wildfire through coffee shops, barbershops, and PTA meetings. At first, many refused to believe the initial reports. Jaxon Kersey had been a fixture in their lives, protective, reliable, and noble. To imagine him as anything but a hero felt like betrayal. But as evidence surfaced and testimonies mounted, denial began to crumble. The narrative that had once painted Naima as a cold, blooded murderer shifted rapidly into something more complex and deeply disturbing. News coverage intensified as more details were leaked from inside the investigation. Anonymous sources from the Ridge Hollow Police Department spoke of a hidden pattern of complaints involving Jaxon. Complaints never made public. One report referenced an incident 5 years earlier in which a young girl claimed Jaxon had touched her inappropriately during a routine traffic stop. The complaint was quietly dismissed. No investigation followed. The girl's family moved away shortly after. Her name was redacted, but her story aligned eerily with what had happened inside the Kersey home. Detective Marvin Arlo continued to pull at threads, finding more than he expected. He uncovered a culture within the department that favored silence over scrutiny. Internal affairs files had been altered or misplaced. Body camera footage had mysteriously gone missing. One officer, who had once served under Jaxon, admitted that Jaxon threatened colleagues into silence. Nobody wanted to be on his bad side, not because he was dangerous, but because he knew how to make problems disappear. Public opinion began to sway. Naima's notebook, which had been entered into evidence, was quoted by national news outlets. Excerpts were broadcast on television. One entry read, "He watches her too closely. I can't say it out loud yet, but I see the fear in her eyes. Something is wrong. And I'm afraid it's already too late." Another entry described a time when Liora woke up screaming and refused to be left alone with her father. The rawness of Naima's words struck a nerve with audiences across the country. A protest formed outside the Ridge Hollow courthouse. It began small, but grew each day as survivors of abuse and their allies rallied behind Naima. They held signs reading, "Protect our daughters," and "Silence is complicity." Others carried photos of Jaxon next to the word "predator" printed in bold red letters. Social media took over the conversation. Hashtags like "FafJustice for Naima" and "FaBelievIora" began trending, with people from across the country sharing similar stories of abuse hidden behind smiles and uniforms. Despite the public support, the legal system moved slowly. Naima remained in custody while the district attorney's office reviewed the evidence. Charges were still pending, and prosecutors debated whether to pursue a full trial. Some within the DA's office believed Naima had acted in a state of temporary insanity. Others argued she acted with deliberate intent. But it became harder to ignore the moral question surrounding her actions. Had she really committed a crime? Or had she simply done what no one else had the strength or position to do? Meanwhile, Liora remained under psychiatric observation in a safe facility. She wasn't speaking much. Her trauma ran deep, compounded by years of fear and betrayal. But her testimony, recorded quietly behind closed doors with trained therapists, helped form the backbone of Naima's defense. She described a pattern of grooming and fear, of isolation and manipulation. She confirmed that what her mother witnessed that night was not a misunderstanding. It was a rescue. The Kersey family's name, once spoken with respect in Ridge Hollow, was now laced with disgust. Former friends distanced themselves. The police department issued a formal apology, but many in the community called it hollow. Detective Arlo, feeling the weight of institutional failure, requested reassignment. He had seen too much to continue pretending everything was fine. Naima's defense attorney filed a motion requesting a full dismissal of charges. The public was watching closely. And though no verdict had been reached, something had already changed. The story was no longer about a wife who had pulled a trigger. It had become about the daughter who had endured, the mother who had protected, and a town that had looked the other way until it was too late. The courtroom was the next battleground. But outside those walls, Naima Kersey had already become something more than a suspect. To many, she was a symbol of defiance, of maternal instinct, of the terrible cost of silence. The courtroom was packed to capacity as Naima Kersey's trial began. Reporters filled every available seat, their cameras flashing as she was led in, hands still cuffed but chin lifted. The town of Ridge Hollow had never seen a trial this large, this controversial, or this emotionally charged. What had started as a domestic homicide investigation had become a national story, one about betrayal, protection, and the consequences of looking away for too long. Naima sat quietly beside her defense attorney, her face pale but composed. She had lost weight during her time in custody, and her once smooth voice had become brittle, almost ghost-like. But despite her fragile appearance, there was something unwavering in her presence. She wasn't there to argue that she hadn't pulled the trigger. She had. Everyone knew that. But her defense didn't rest on denial. It rested on truth. Her truth. Liora's truth. The prosecution argued that regardless of motive, Naima had taken the law into her own hands. They claimed she had options: calling child services, reporting her husband, fleeing the home. They painted her as unstable, emotionally overwhelmed, someone who had allowed fear and anger to override reason. They showed the photographs of Jaxon's body, pointed to the firearm, and tried to reduce the case to a simple equation: murder equals guilt. But then came the defense. They called witnesses. Liora's teacher, Camille Dort, who spoke of the child's withdrawal and unexplained injuries. They brought Marla Ryan to the stand, who testified to Naima's growing fears and their conversations in the months before the shooting. Then, they played selected readings from Naima's private journal, its words narrated by a courtroom official. The entries were haunting, filled with sorrow and confusion. One described Liora waking up from nightmares, another the drawing Naima had found under the couch. The journal painted a portrait of a mother trapped in a nightmare, watching her child slowly vanish into silence. Finally, the courtroom heard from Liora. She did not appear in person. Her testimony was given via recorded video, shown to the jury under tight protections. She sat in a hospital room with a soft blanket around her shoulders, her eyes hollow but focused. She confirmed what Naima had witnessed that night. She explained that the abuse had started subtly and had escalated over time. She talked about the fear, the shame, the way her father convinced her that no one would believe her. And then, she described how everything changed when her mother walked in. There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom when the video ended. Even the judge paused to compose herself. The prosecution's rebuttals sounded weak in comparison. They tried to regain footing, questioning why Naima had never gone to the authorities. But with each argument, the weight of Jaxon's secrets loomed larger. The jury could not unhear Liora's voice. They could not unsee the bruises, the medical reports, or the institutional failures that had allowed a predator to live undetected inside his own home. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. Naima Kersey was found not guilty on all major counts. The courtroom erupted with emotion. Some wept, others applauded, and many simply sat in stunned silence. Naima's hands were unshackled. She stood, tears streaking her face, and was immediately surrounded by her legal team. She didn't celebrate. She asked one thing only: that she be allowed to see her daughter. The court granted her immediate release, and within hours, mother and daughter were reunited at a secure facility outside the city. The embrace between them was quiet, long, and filled with a sorrow few could understand. It wasn't joy. It was survival. They had made it out of the fire, but the smoke would linger for years. Detective Marvin Arlo retired quietly soon after the verdict. He had requested to be reassigned to juvenile advocacy but decided instead to leave the badge behind altogether. He admitted, in a rare public statement, that the system had failed the Kerseys long before Naima ever pulled the trigger. Ridge Hollow's police department underwent internal review. Several officers were disciplined or removed. New training programs were implemented, but for many, it was too late. The damage had already been done. Naima and Liora moved far away under a court-protected identity change. Their exact location remains unknown, but somewhere, far from Ridge Hollow, a mother and daughter are trying to rebuild. They speak in soft voices now, trusting slowly, living quietly. The past isn't forgotten, but it no longer defines them. And the town that once stood behind a badge now lives with the memory of a truth they almost missed, hidden in a child's silence and a mother's desperate courage.